I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 3 o'clock. Sir Keir Starmer says the reputation of the country and its democracy is being trashed by the Prime Minister. It's after the government tried to prevent former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson's suspension for breaching lobbying rules. Parliament is due to hold an emergency debate on standards tomorrow. The Sun's associate editor Kevin Kavanagh told GB News the Prime Minister will survive the criticism.
I think that Boris will go through a very rough time tomorrow in Parliament and will get a kicking, and he will take it probably with his usual rueful smile. And to be honest, I think that no matter how big this seems at the moment, this will pale into the distance as other events unfold in the coming weeks and months. And I don't think actually that this particular event will have any impact on the next election.
The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is urging the elderly and vulnerable to get their COVID booster jab to help avoid restrictions over Christmas. In England, a record over 370,000 people received a top-up vaccine yesterday. It means almost 8.5 million people have received one in the 7 weeks since the launch of the latest phase of the programme. The US is reopening its borders to UK visitors who are fully vaccinated against COVID tomorrow. The country has been closed since early 2020 due to the pandemic. Travellers from Ireland and the 26 Schengen nations in Europe, China, India and South Africa are among those also allowed in on Monday. Mayowan Bazorgi, the managing director of Global Travel Experts, has told GB News holidaymakers are already booking flights.
It's something we've been waiting to hear for a very, very long time, and it's finally happened. So it's all-round excitement. I mean, the whole travel industry as a whole are celebrating this, and we've got customers booked to fly to America as early as tomorrow morning on the first flights.
Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. Investigations are underway after at least 8 people were killed and dozens injured at a Travis Scott festival in Texas. The rapper says he's absolutely devastated after the stampede at his Astroworld music festival in Houston on Friday. He was on stage when the crowd surged forward, which police are calling a mass casualty incident.
My fans really mean the world to me, and I always just really want to leave them with a positive experience. And anytime I can make out, anything that's going on, I just stop the show and help them get the help they need, I could just never imagine the severity of the situation.
The Environment Secretary says the government is considering taxing imports from countries with poor environmental records. The carbon border tax would attempt to reduce pollution and help businesses protect their green status. George Eustice insists the move would not increase food prices. He says the levy would take several years to bring in. Aston Villa has sacked manager Dean Smith after 3 years in charge. His side suffered a 5th successive Premier League defeat on Friday, losing 1-0 to Southampton at St Mary's. He guided the club back into the top flight in his first season in charge via the playoffs. The 50-year-old also led Villa to the League Cup final at Wembley in 2020, narrowly losing 2-1 to Manchester City. You're up to date. We'll have more on today's top stories in an hour.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About, your weekend fix, where I pose a question that needs plenty of time for discussion. Today, we need to talk about divorce. Over lockdown, inquiries to lawyers about divorce doubled, with requests mainly coming from women. Having to spend 24 hours a day together, 7 days a week, made some couples realise Mr. or Mrs. Right was actually very wrong. Divorce has been on the rise for decades as society has evolved, and with it, the place of marriage in it. Far from the economic union of old, where it was expected that the man was the breadwinner and the woman manager of home and hearth, the emancipation of women from the kitchen to the workplace and an increasingly secularised society has placed an ironic burden on marriage: love itself. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But where before a match was forged on distinct familial roles and underscored by a contract with God, all of a sudden it has been stripped of such parts and the entire emphasis placed on matters of the heart. The biggest decision someone is likely to take in their life is often left entirely to the whim of hormones and emotions, fragile, fickle and fallible feelings. While love has always played a significant role in marriage, the fact that today it is the Holy Grail, as an idealised abstract, has placed an onerous onus on both finding and sticking by the one. Today, pressure for blame-free quickie divorces represents this significant evolution. People can fall out of love as easily as they fall in. And with the constructs of asset division and expected duty less impactful when both partners have jobs and are not bound by societal shame, quickie divorces may offer a neater, less combative approach to separation. But does it undermine the very institution of marriage? If such a contract is so easy to break, what was its worth in the first place? Equally, prenuptials, regarded by many in Britain as a strangely cynical and materialistic interpretation of matrimony and at odds with the assumed properties of true love and romance, are equally more in step with the fundamental principle behind marriage as a fusion of assets and allocation of roles and responsibilities. There are some that argue the very process of premarital mediation actually helps couples foresee issues and delineates the rules of their relationship in advance, future-proofing their marriage by having a conversation that usually only takes place too late during separation. In the absence of a pre-signed agreement, divorce can become a messy, brutal and highly destructive process, drawing into its mire relatives, friendships and children, leaving carnage in its wake. In an increasingly commodified, disposable society where sexual freedoms have been elevated to an extraordinary height and individualism has placed emphasis on the concept of total fulfillment, marriage has become an increasingly brittle bond, more often like the rope in a tug of war, and divorce a societal norm. So how can we get together and stay together, or if that's impossible, consciously uncouple in the least destructive manner? Today, we really need to talk about divorce. Well, let's talk first to Sarah Jane Lenihan, who is a partner at Stowe Family Law. She advises on family law, including divorce. Sarah Jane, fantastic to have you on. I mean, marriage breakdown is incredibly difficult, isn't it? Did you find that rates of people inquiring about divorce spiked during lockdown?
Well, initially we did see that they actually dropped at the beginning. So in March, we saw that they actually went down and things were quite quiet. We think that may have been because people weren't used to accessing services remotely. They were used to coming into a solicitor's office. But over the summer, we saw them peak, and our sort of peak in June was up 40%.
And what are the main reasons cited when people come to you? Do they usually say, well, you know, I just can't bear to live with them anymore, they've had an affair, there's financial troubles? If you could sort of categorise most of the motivations for divorce, which ones appear most commonly?
So we do see a lot of adultery, and that's one of the facts that you can rely upon when divorcing. During lockdown, we saw a lot of people spending a lot longer time together, whereas they were used to very busy lives, whether it was jobs, social life, and there just wasn't that space, that time to get away. And it really put so much pressure on so many marriages. Mental health, finances, And one of the big things we see as well is addiction, whether that's drugs, alcohol, or gambling, as well as, sadly, we saw a big increase as well in domestic abuse during the lockdown as well.
What's your initial response when someone comes through your door and says, I'm thinking about getting a divorce? Do you just sit them down straight away and say, well, let's work through the assets you have and, you know, how quickly or how messily you want to make this process? Or do you say, are you sure you really want to get divorced?
Yes, well, it is such a big step that I always do explore with the client whether this is right for them. And I will, even if a client says to me, I 100% want to go ahead, let me sign up now, I always tell them to go away and think about it, because there's a lot of information that we provide in that initial meeting, and it is such a big step that, you know, I personally would like to be sure that it is really right for them. And so normally I start with a sort of a general background conversation just to find out why they're in my office, what has got them to this situation, so I know a little bit more.
And then do you find people, when you say go away and have a thing, do you find some people don't come back and perhaps thank you for giving them such candid advice and enabling them to get their relationships back on course?
Yes, and I find that clients actually really appreciate that sort of approach, and that I'm not, you know, us as lawyers sometimes get bad reputation. I'm not just trying to sign them up as quickly as possible, and as you mentioned, you know, divide up their assets and make it as messy as possible. You know, my ideal outcome, as I say to clients, is, you know, if things are relatively amicable and it's just, you know, there's nothing serious going on in that relationship, I say to them, you know, in the nicest possible way, I hope that I don't see you again. And they sometimes don't come back. Sometimes I have clients come back 6 months. I've had clients come back 2 years later, where they've gone away, tried to work on things, and it really hasn't worked, for example. But, you know, I like to be really sure that that's the right route for them before embarking on it, because it is costly, it does take a lot of time, and it can be extremely expensive.
And how commonplace today are prenups in the UK? Are more and more people getting them? Or are they still sort of fairly a rare commodity?
I would say more common, and I think the younger generation are speaking about divorce more openly, as you mentioned in your introduction. I don't think it's a taboo as much as it used to be, and so we get many inquiries, particularly from the younger generation, or where older, so maybe parents or grandparents, are providing money to their children or grandchildren, and they want to safeguard that money, and often a prenuptial agreement is a way of doing that.
Sarah Jane, fascinating. Thank you so much for your insight and your oversight, in fact, in this really interesting topic. That's Sarah Jane Lenihan, who's partner at Stowe Family Law. Well, let's talk to the writer Jenny Holland, who has been through a divorce herself. Jenny, what was that experience like for you? Was it as horrible and traumatic as people say, or did you actually manage to work through the process quite calmly and in a civil manner?
No, it was as horrible as people say, unfortunately. I did not manage to pull a Gwyneth Paltrow and consciously uncouple. Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the most brutal experiences, at least in my life. And you're really talking about dismantling your entire life and having to rebuild it from zero, which, you know, in my case, I was in my late 30s and I had a young son. And so, yeah, it was frightening. It had certain sort of long-lasting, borderline catastrophic financial consequences. But because we're talking about sort of irretrievable breakdown between two people, in the end, it had to be done. And I think that's where the terrible quandary is with divorce, because on the one hand, you don't want to encourage it, but I think probably more often than not, it does need to be done.
What was the biggest challenge for you and the biggest lesson you learned from that experience?
It made me quite introspective, because fundamentally it's a failure in your own life. And, you know, you're the person that oversees your life. So you really have to kind of take stock of how you got to that point. And, you know, it's just a matter of learning that it's very hard to know another person. It makes it hard to trust in your own instincts, because you kind of go into it with one perspective, and then a few years in, you think, oh, wow, I got this completely wrong.
And having gone through this yourself, have you got any advice you might give to someone watching right now who's thinking, I'm not in a happy place and, you know, maybe I'm thinking of separating? Would you say, well, try and work it out? Or if you really are in an unhappy place, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would definitely say try to work it out. I would definitely ask a person who came to me with that question. I would say, have you done a true inventory of your own expectations? Can you identify where you might be projecting certain unrealistic expectations onto your partner? What are the kind of implicit, unspoken habits that might be harming the relationship from both parties? The previous guest mentioned addictions. That is certainly a huge issue, I would say, in a lot of people's lives, and that to the point they don't even realize perhaps that they are drinking too much. Or I think porn is something that's growing ever more toxic in terms of male-female dynamics. And then ultimately you have to be very brave, and you have to, if you decide that it's best to leave, and often it is, you have to prepare yourself, really steel yourself for a few years of loneliness and vulnerability.
Jenny, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us with such honesty, and thank you for your sage words. That's Jenny Holland, a writer who's been through the very brutal process for her of divorce. Well, let's cross the pond to speak to Stephen Petro, a US columnist and author of Stupid Things I Won't Do When I Get Old. Hi, Stephen. Now, you were in a same-sex marriage which ended, and you've previously described feeling both pride and sadness about the split. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, Alex, it's great to be with you. And my heart really goes out to Jenny, because so much of what she talked about resonated with me. At first, it was very painful to get to this breaking point, which we had gotten to. And we kind of went through the lawyer part and all of that. But a little bit into the process, I realized that because we now had the right to marry in the United States, and we had gotten married as part of that, which was a great privilege, going through the same separation and divorce process as an opposite-sex couple really legitimized what this process was. We had lawyers, we had alimony, we had acrimony, and that was very equal in a certain way, and that would not have happened a generation ago. So in that way, if you talk about equality, there's the equality of all the wonderful things that come with this institution, and then there's the equality that comes with the dissolution and the painful aspects.
And I mean, as with many couples, sometimes things don't work out. But what was the actual divorce process like for you? Was it long-winded? Was it, did you find it created so much more antimony and anxiety, or did you find you're able to kind of work with your ex-partner to manage your separation?
It was interesting when I was listening to your introduction. You raised so many of the anxieties and fears that many people have as they start to think about this. And I was thinking, oh, that's fear mongering. But no, they're all true. We don't all have them all of the time. But one of the points I got to was I really could not let the fear of becoming single, the fear of being age 59 and having to plan a life or take care of my aging plan, stop me from doing what I thought was going to be best for me. And ultimately, I think it was best for my ex-husband. So in North Carolina, there's an interesting law which requires you to be legally separated for 1 year. And we have that in many states here. And it's meant to give that window of opportunity to couples to think about things and perhaps come back. So it's a very sort of family first type of policy. I don't know if that exists in the UK, but it does here in the United States.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, I think there is a sort of time limit on how long you have to be separated before you can apply for a divorce. It might be 6 months. I'll have to get someone to check that for me. But in terms of coming out the other side of divorce now, has that sort of put you off going through marriage again? Do you now think marriage is not an institution that you want to be part of again? Or or did you actually remarry? I mean, what are your views on matrimony now?
My views are very much the same. As a gay man, it was incredibly unfair that same-sex couples could not have the same legal benefits. So I feel that as strongly now as I did before I got married, and when I was married. When I find someone who I feel compatible with, who I want to spend the rest of my life with, I hope I will get married again. The one thing I have learned since the last time was the importance of a prenup. We had discussed a lot of issues. We were on the same page, but there was no legal documentation of that. And that became a problem when there was acrimony, and it was he said, he said. So I do think prenups can really serve a very good benefit for couples and just kind of lay a foundation, especially for couples who might be in midlife.
Stephen, it's been wonderful talking to you. If you ever need a wing woman, I'll come over. You're great fun. Nice having you on the programme today, and best of luck. That's Stephen Petro, US columnist and author, who has just been through a same-sex divorce. You've just heard from lawyer Sarah Jane Lenihan from Stowe Family Law, writer Jenny Holland, and US journalist and author Stephen Petro. After the break, I'm continuing this conversation with the Research Director at Marriage Foundation, Harry Benson, Divorce Coach Sarah Dawson, and Chief Communications Officer at the charity CARE, James Mildred. See you in a couple of minutes. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints, where over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
I was the child of a broken home. My biological father left my mother for another woman and completely turned his back on his children, entirely abandoning my brother and I for the rest of our lives. Well, thankfully, my mum remarried and I got a significant father upgrade. Dad 2.0 is definitely a keeper. My situation is perhaps unusual by the complete absence of my birth father, but apart from that, an experience of innumerable families, with 42% of marriages now ending in divorce. Does the process therefore need to be streamlined, or is it already too easy and too available? What about the custody of children, even pets, the splitting of assets, alimony? One thing is for sure, divorce is rarely an edifying experience, yet increasingly commonplace. Are we perhaps too wedded to the concept of a get-out-of-marriage option? Or should it be far simpler and less destructive when the one turns out instead to be the first? We really need to talk about divorce. Well, let's talk now to Sarah Davison, who's a divorce coach and author of Uncoupling, How to Survive and Thrive After a Breakup and Divorce. Sarah, thank you for joining me. You've described being totally floored by your own divorce. What did you learn from your experience?
Yes, you're right. I was absolutely floored. It hit me like a freight train because I didn't see it coming. And at the time, I had been a coach for, I think it was about 15 years. And I thought, gosh, I should be able to manage my own emotions, but I was really struggling. So many things I learned. I mean, at the time, I couldn't see an end to it. I couldn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I was definitely doing a lot of that ugly crying on the bathroom floor and, panicking about my future. And what I've learned from working with thousands of people around the world is that that's totally normal. And, obviously in those first stages, you are going to go through that devastation, that shock, that overwhelm, especially if you didn't see it coming. But I guess the good news is that you can get through it, and you will get through it. And just knowing that and having the faith, even though maybe at the beginning you don't have the how, is really important. So I developed quite a few techniques and tools to get me through by combining my coaching experience with the divorce world that I was thrown into. And that's now what I share with people around the world to help them cope with the emotional roller coaster, as well as those practical challenges that we all face going through a breakup.
In terms of your clients, are they largely more men or women, or is it a 50-50 split?
I think predominantly women. I have more female clients, but I think men enjoy coaching. They're used to it. They have business coaches. I mean, coaching is very much part of business life as well. So I have probably 20% male clients, but predominantly female clients. I think women maybe find it easier to ask for help. So I think that's probably why.
And what sort of advice do you give them? Is it sort of practical advice, emotional advice, both?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, obviously, every client is different. Every scenario is different. And I think, it's really tailored to the individual. Some people are absolutely devastated. For example, last week I had 3 different clients, all dealing with betrayal. So their partners had betrayed them, gone off to start new relationships with other people. The first one was devastated, crying uncontrollably. The second one was very angry. So similar situation, but angry instead of crying all the time. And the third one, well, she was quite relieved, to be honest. She was like, oh, I'm out of it, but I'm just stuck. I don't know where to go. So the advice will differ, from very simple tips, like, for example, don't keep telling your sad story. A lot of people will tell everybody and anybody that will listen. And whilst it can feel quite therapeutic in the moment, but often that's what keeps us stuck. So, rather than telling the hairdresser and your friends and the family and anyone that asks, trying to replace that with maybe something new that you're doing now, or a new opportunity that's come up since the breakup, will definitely help get you out of that repetition and that sort of hamster wheel of staying stuck. But also little tips that I love, like, if you are heartbroken and you're really struggling to let go of your ex, then maybe don't use their full name, because a name has a lot of emotion attached to it. So instead of using a full name, maybe either it's Robert or say Rachel, just reducing that down to their first initial, but I'm not talking a capital letter either, by the way. I'm talking like a teeny weeny little r, and referring them to as R actually takes a lot of emotion out and enables you to dial down some of that negative emotion, that intensity, so that you can start to steady your emotions and start to look moving forward.
So fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for helping people going through really horrible times. That's Sarah Davison, divorce coach and author. After the break, I'm continuing this conversation with your views on divorce, so I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, welcome back. We're talking about divorce today. Joining me now is one of the UK's leading champions for marriage, Harry Benson, Research Director of the Marriage Foundation. Harry, does it sadden you that it seems more and more couples are heading towards divorce today? And what do you think is the reason for that?
Well, interestingly, divorce rates are now at the lowest rate they've been for the last 50 years. They peaked back in the 80s and 90s, and they've been coming down ever since. And it's not just because fewer people are getting married. That's been happening since way back in the 70s. Divorce rates went up and then they went down all the time while fewer and fewer people have been getting married. But divorce rates are, I think, at their lowest level now because the people who are marrying are really serious about it. They're really committed about it. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think it's interesting. We've just been listening to dear old Boris. And there's a man who knows a little bit about marriage and divorce. And I think our attitudes to divorce have become much healthier. And I think it's pretty well encapsulated in the way that we see and think about Boris as a man who's been through a number of relationships, and yet, there's remarkably little comment, as there might have been in the past, about his family status, and quite rightly, to some extent, we focus on his ability to do the job well or not.
Oh, there was a report out very recently saying that people who meet via online dating apps or meet online are 6 times more likely to divorce than those who didn't. Does that sort of ring true to you? Do you think that people sort of, especially if you're in that system where you're swiping and there's this endless conveyor belt of choice, that in the end you end up looking for something that is completely idealistic and might not even exist?
Well, that report is actually my report, and we surveyed 2,000 adults aged 30 plus earlier this summer, and we asked where they met, and about 30% of couples in recent years have met online, so we now know roughly how many people meet online rather than through family and friends or whatever. And we found that their risk of divorce in the early years, in those first 3 years, was about 6 times higher. But after that, that risk disappears. And I think there are probably a couple of reasons why that risk is higher. And I mean, we're talking relative risk here. So this is not about condemning people or whatever. I think a lot of it is to do with meeting a relative stranger. And we're all strangers when we meet, of course, at first. But we've got friends and family and work colleagues or whatever who've known that person for a long time and can perhaps give us a little bit of balance to the best foot forward that we're seeing in that person. So, you know, when we go out together, when we're dating with one another, we see each other through rose-tinted spectacles, and we're doing the best that we can. We're showing our good side. And you can get a bit of balance from the old, more traditional ways of doing that. So I think it does raise the risk a little bit. And it may well also be that people who are using long-term dating apps are looking for that reliable love, maybe even possibly a little bit too hard and going into it a little bit too quickly. But, you know, this isn't on average. On average, couples who get married tend to do much better in the long run than those who don't marry. And people who meet through dating apps and through online methods, ultimately, if they can survive those early years, actually do no better, no worse than anybody else, whether you met through family or friends or through work or socially or whatever.
Harry, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. And thank you also for your patience earlier as we flew back to Glasgow and COP26. Well, let's talk now to James Mildred, Chief Communications Officer at the Christian charity CARE. James, do you think as a society our commitment to marriage as a lifelong union is waning, and is divorce perhaps becoming too easy an option?
I think it is waning, and I think that divorce is becoming, and has been for some time, too easy an option. And I understand why that's happened. You know, we live in a culture and society where the great emphasis is on individual choice, individual autonomy, my rights to do as I please. And I think when we have that mentality and we forget that actually we were made to live for the benefit of others, to contribute to the whole of society, not just to live narrow and self-centered lives, we can begin to see how actually if we promote marriage as a lifelong commitment and union, if we invest in relationship support, and if we use public policy and laws to send a clear message that in actual fact marriage matters and it should not be too easy to get a divorce, we'll do a tremendous amount of good for society. I think about the fact that at the moment in this country, we have a tax system that takes absolutely zero account of family responsibility or marriage, compared to other tax systems around the world that do recognize family responsibilities. These things have consequences, and in our society, I fear that the consequence of our individualistic culture is that divorce is seen often as too easy an option for some, and marriage is not given the prestige that I think it should.
And how important do you think it is to have the underscoring of a religious commitment, a commitment in front of God when it comes to marriage? And do you think that sort of acts as a preventative when the institution is regarded as sacrosanct in the true meaning of the word? Does that help to keep couples together?
Well, I absolutely agree with that. I do think it helps to keep couples together. I think it's entirely possible for people with no faith to have a tremendous marriage that lasts an incredibly long time. But I think from my perspective and the organization that I work for, we believe that God created marriage. We believe this is his good design for all human beings, not just for Christians. And I think there is something uniquely special and powerful about that lifelong commitment where you say, I am going to live and serve you and love you no matter what happens. It really is till death do us part. And I was struck just recently by a couple in the church that I go to, an amazing couple who've been married for 68 years. And sadly, Eileen's just passed away. Reg, married 68 years, now a widower. And yet speaking to him, listening to him, and the stories, the testimony of how their marriage just led to so much blessing and happiness. And we know that children, by and large, do best when they come from a stable home, when there is two parents who are committed to each other in a marriage relationship. And Christianity, throughout the centuries, since it first burst onto the world stage, as it were, in the time of the Roman Empire, Christianity has always emphasized the importance of commitment and the fact that marriage is something that God has created. And when marriage is recognized by public policy, when we put forward positive pro-marriage public policies, then actually the whole of society benefits. Children especially benefit, adults benefit as well, and the whole of society itself is improved as a result. So I would love to see more MPs, more members of the House of Lords being positive about marriage and being pro-marriage. I would love to see more pro-marriage policies coming out of Westminster. And I would love to see the tax system in this country changed so that marriage is properly recognised and acknowledged. It's not about being old-fashioned. It's about recognising the good that marriage is in our society. And as I've said already, as a Christian, that's because God created marriage. It's his perfect design. And if we can encourage it and really reach out to all those young people that the research tells us desperately want to get married, but sometimes just don't know about getting the money necessary to be able to do it. If we can just reach out to them and help them, it would make such an incredible difference in our society.
James, always delighted to speak to you. Thank you for coming on the programme today. Now, here are a few of your thoughts on divorce. Kate says, people change over time. It often happens slowly. So as long as at least one partner is out at work most of the time, the cracks under the surface are never so obvious. Moggy says, oh, my cat's messaged into the show. Amazing. Don't get married in the first place. I can see why she's saying that to me. She's my down payment on spinsterhood. Don't get married in the first place is the best answer to that. It's old-fashioned and unnecessary. How strange. Nathan says, marriage is a union which binds two individuals to a higher social and moral responsibility in protecting and nurturing children. There's nothing more necessary. Aaron says, if it's not working, then it's not working. A piece of paper should not be the reason to stay together. Freddie says, yes, hence for the worst part. Marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Choose your hardness. Well, it's time to get the result of our poll on Twitter at GBNews. We asked, do we need to fall out of love with divorce? 60% of you said yes, and 40% of you said no. Look at you, you committed romantics. It's nice to see the viewers of GB News believe in the institution of marriage so deeply. I'm Alex Phillips, and you've been watching We Need to Talk About. And for the last hour, we've been talking about divorce. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you next time.
You're the first in your family to go to university, so whatever challenges your childhood presented, it didn't stop you going to university. How did you find it?
Never felt like a student. I was always like a townie who was doing a degree and a little bit apprehensive about it. None of my friends really had gone to university. They're all trained as plumbers and electricians and that kind of thing. And it was completely not what I expected, a lot more down to earth. And I studied politics, so you can decide whether that was useful or not.
You say you played hard and you worked hard. You did your schoolwork too. You get into Oxford.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. But I just was like a fish out of water, like, for most of it, to be honest. Although I did make some really good friends there.
Why were you a fish out of water?
State educated, northern girl doing science. And the work is really, really hard. It's completely different. What I realised was everybody else had a lot of coaching, a lot of extra tuition, a lot of support. There was no teaching, really. It's just like, here's an exercise book, get on with it. Crushed my confidence immediately, which, having gone from being this sort of clever, like, oh, you're out of 2,000 kids in this sixth form college in Manchester, we want you to sort of apply for you. I was the only one who got in out of that, to basically being made to feel like I was totally thick. You know, is quite crushing.
Did your parents separate when you were young? Do you know your dad?
They separated when I was 10. My father left home for strangely with a woman round the corner. I have to say, it's probably it made things more difficult financially, but it also made me probably appreciate what I've actually had, what I then had in the future, so to speak.
When you get abuse on Twitter or wherever, does it ever make you stop and think, am I right? Because this is quite a barrage.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm one of these people who occasionally likes to stick my neck out with things. Some can say that's being a little populist or deliberately controversial. Been accused of making it as clickbait before, for example, that kind of thing. But I mean, these are all things that I do genuinely believe in. And I always say that, you know, if you don't believe something, don't say it.
Has it ever become more than just social media abuse?
I think where it crossed the line for me is when they start making comments about your family or threats and so on. And I think after I made the comment about taking the knee, I had one particularly unpleasant message that was sent to me. And it said basically about kneeling on my children's necks until they were dead because they wanted me to feel that pain. I had to speak to my wife about that and brief her beforehand just to say, look, please don't get upset with this. Don't take it too personally. It's just idiots on a keyboard. It's not going to happen in real life. But I think sometimes people forget in terms of the security we have. My house, you know, it's been fitted with panic alarms and new locks and everything. And in my case, it was just a threat. The police dealt with it. They were great and so on. But it just does make you worry in future that something actually bad could happen.
You described Facebook as a morality-free zone.
I was being unkind to them that day, I think. Yeah. Facebook is a bit of a cult, let's be honest about it. I mean, it just appears to have a different agenda, in fact, than the other social media companies. And they have a huge impact on society, so therefore, they do need to engage properly with political process. I would like to see them take the approach that I do think some of the other ones are taking. We don't want to see society crumble. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to work to ensure that our platforms are still free, but at the same time, they still have at least an understanding of the social harms that can happen and proper processes in place in order to combat those. Facebook needs to come a long way towards that, and they're not doing it yet.
Lucy, would you like to lead your party one day?
I don't think I would. No, not really. I think the cost on one's actual life would just be far, far, far too great, to be honest. As women, we do weigh up those costs a lot more, the cost to our family, the cost to our lives. I think as women, we do generally, we wear that responsibility is weighted on us a lot more.
The Tory women seem to, I mean, come on, because they've done better, they've done better, considerably better than the Labour Party.
I know, but to be fair, there is I'm not being disparaging about it, but there is a sort of a different sort of culture with maybe people who are a bit posher about boarding schools and nannies and things like that. It's not quite the same as, you know, trying to pair up the socks and deal with the homework.
Someone like Ricky Gervais in this country, he says whatever he wants and he doesn't care about because he can't be cancelled, you know?
And he can come to America.
Well, yeah.
And he gets to come over here. He can't be canceled, but I still think that even he toes the line a little bit. He thinks about it. I mean, I do think he considers it. You have to, you know, because the weird thing is, like for me, like what I feel about what's happening right now. I mean, I feel like I could talk about it on stage because I'm established, but I also think, like, you know, if you're partners with the biggest streaming service in the world, and then if you also, you know, you're doing a commercial for this international company, and so you have to think, you know what, how much do I really want to rock the boat? And as a Canadian, it's your job. You know, the best description, Ralph Gleason, who was a terrific writer, talked about Lenny Bruce. in a seminal book about Lenny Bruce. And he said that Lenny was the pearl in the oyster.
Yeah.
And Lenny Bruce, the great American comedian. And so the oyster is a beautiful thing that's created. So the oyster is the society, and it creates this beautiful thing, a pearl, that Lenny Bruce. But the pearl is attacking the oyster.
Yeah.
So, and it has to cover it, and hopefully it just goes away. And it's this beautiful thing. So I do think that sometimes I think people forget that this is supposed to be an irritant. You are supposed to, as a comedian, you're supposed to be controversial. You're supposed to take the other side. You're supposed to get the audience to question their foundational thinking. And that, to me, what's happening with this wokeism, and I've been thinking about it a lot, because also it has to do with this new religion of scientism, is that what was really happening is this, as our good friend, Professor Peter Boghossian, he will tell you, there is even though they claim to be atheistic or atheist, or they claim they are still, there's a religious architecture in their thinking.
Yeah.
And so in that religious architecture, you're either with the religion or you're a heretic. And if you're a heretic, they try to burn you at the stake with this new fanaticism, and the burning you at the stake is social media.
That ability to look away and let things be is a sign of maturity. And behind closed doors, and this is what the racism of low expectations is about, but those Muslims, they're just not there yet. That's really what it boils down to.
That's a really interesting point as far as that. Is it this expectation that Muslims are likely to react violently if they're upset? That's a very patronising
because the Christians used to do that in the past. They're over it now.
Right.
They're old enough, they're mature enough, they're adults. But the expectation that a Muslim who expects to be offended.
Yes.
So the assumption is if you're a Muslim, a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad, whether it's flattering or not, is going to offend you. Can you look away?
Well, it's not necessarily true that all Muslims would be offended.
Well, first of all, it's not true.
Yeah.
That's again why I think it's a form of racism, and it's a form of, in itself, if you want to pursue the notion of Islamophobia,
yes.
It is actually a form of phobia. First of all, it's not true. It applies to a minority.
Yes.
But the assumption is they can't deal with it. The Christians can, the Jews can, maybe the Buddhists and the Sikh can.
Yes.
But the Muslims, they can't deal with it. They're just going to erupt in a violent rage.
What I'm trying to investigate is bias.
Yes.
And how it's formed, because I definitely have bias. I am biased. We've all got bias.
But do you think almost that you've been formed, like you're such a product of your culture and your background, that in a way you don't have a choice the way you think? Are you a bit, or do you think you have been critical and thought about politics and thought about these things and come to your own resolution?
I think that there's a bit of that, but one of the things that the book highlighted to me was there were little small c conservative moments, even quite early in life, and I don't know where that comes from in your personality. Maybe you've got like a bit of judgy DNA or a kind of personal responsibility chromosome or something. Yeah. But I believe that some of it is intuitively there in people. And so that lays a sort of bedrock for who you're going to be. And even when, I mean, it was in the book, but even when I voted with a lot of conviction for Blair in '97, I don't regret that. I still think that's the right thing to do. But when Michael Portillo was unseated, was it Kensington and Chelsea?
Yeah.
And the whole country were laughing. And I just felt a bit sorry for him.
You felt bad for him, yeah.
I just thought, oh, bless it. And I thought, something's wrong here. Because at the time I was living in a council house in Mitcham, I could hear people celebrating down the street. And I was just thinking, oh, he's probably doing his best.
Just start by telling us, Andy, in a nutshell, what is car share?
Easiest way to describe car share is like an Airbnb equivalent for cars. We enable car owners who have a car they're not using very much, or two cars, the second one being not used very much, to be able to share and rent those cars out to other people who live nearby. We call them renters. The renters can then access those cars through an application and open the car simply through the phone. So we enable owners to share cars and rent them to renters.
So it's connected to the car and it's showing you exactly which car it is.
Yeah, so this is, I'm now in rental.
Yeah.
As I get closer to the car, the phone connects to the car through Bluetooth. So there's no signal required, no phone signal.
Okay.
So that's all eradicated. This is now Bluetooth into the car.
Okay.
The functions to unlock and lock the car are now live. So if we unlock the car, you'll see it flash, hopefully. That's unlocked. Wow. That's just unlocked the car. So I'll get in the car now. Car's open. Off we go.
Wow. All through your phone?
Yeah.
We store, pick, pack and post on behalf of e-commerce sellers. So the guys that you buy from online, particularly in the last couple of years, people have been stuck at home buying from people online. We actually ship that stuff out.
So if you make stuff in your garden shed and sell it online, Hubu can take care of all the logistics, all the packaging, all the difficult stuff that really stops businesses from growing.
We can. We're unique in doing it for a much broader range of clients. Someone's always done that. They've always been fulfillment companies, which is what a company like ours is called. But they've tended to work with big clients, clients that have relatively few items and that ship them in huge volumes. We work with clients of all sizes, complex clients, clients that sell secondhand or vintage, small clients, people that do sell from their bedroom, so a really broad range.
I know you're also very keen to stress the environmental implications of what you're trying to do here with car share.
They've proven that for every one car shared, it can take up to 10 others off the road, which means that 10 other cars don't need to be produced or replaced if others are saying, look, I seldom use my car. Do you know what? I don't want to replace it with another vehicle. I'm going to use a car sharing scheme like car share to access cars when I need them. So that's a big deal, actually. Taking that number of cars off the roads creates such big positive benefits.
The industrial processes that go into making the actual physical car.
Yeah. Imagine if we were producing half as many cars, how much emissions we would save right at the start of the process. The other great thing, of course, is that when cars are shared, the people that use them, that rent them, do it because they're purpose-driven. They don't pop to the shops and therefore hire a car to go to Sainsbury's 10 minutes. They do proper activity, seeing things, seeing people, seeing places. So it reduces that short number of trips, which is really positive. The other aspect is the more cars we can take off our streets because of that, lack of replacement, people sharing more and people accessing more, there is more space on our streets. In some cities, congestion can be 25% or 25% of the congestion can be caused by the lack of a parking space. We're driving around for 20 minutes trying to find a place to park your car. With less cars in the future on our streets, much easier to find a space, that congestion eases and the pollution eases.
Tell us about the physical side of the business.
It looks unlike a traditional warehouse, so we really revolutionised the way the warehouse floor works. There are some fundamental problems with warehousing, the biggest one being that it makes people miserable. It has them walking miles and miles every day, so that's a fairly depressing job. So what we did was we created what's called a micro warehouse, and this was really the brainchild of Paul Dodd, my co-founder. The micro warehouse collapses the business into a smaller warehouse that is run by a single individual. So that might be a picker or a packer. For us, they manage the whole thing, more like a retail unit, all of the inbound, all of the outbound, the picking, the packing, the posting. And crucially, they engage with the client as well. So they get that feedback loop that lets them know they're doing a wonderful job or helps them if they're not. And that created a sense of ownership.
How about your East End background? Does that help?
It's made me tenacious and hardworking, and nothing gets in my way, nothing stops me. But it's also made me very concerned that the people that work for us should be treated properly and paid properly. We work really hard.
Because you know what it's like at the sharp end.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just got sharper and sharper over the last 10 or 15 years. Those kinds of jobs, the wages haven't increased. Meanwhile, for the rest of us, that they've tended to go up. Meanwhile, the cost of rent these days is ridiculous. It's really difficult for people to make ends meet that are doing those kinds of jobs.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news.